Okay, well, why don't I start? So what we wanted to do is give everyone a little bit of an introduction on ourselves, just so you know where we fit in the consumer privacy space. And I think that's an important term because there has been a lot of sessions, people talking about enterprise privacy solutions, but we're probably quite different in that we're focused down at the average user, providing them privacy. So where am I from? I'm from a company called Anonyome Labs. And the reason that we were created is because of this sense of lack of control that people have of their personal data. Every time they go online, every time you use a service, an app, anywhere, first thing you do is start to give a whole bunch of your personal details away. And we know it's eventually going to be sold, it's going to be stolen, it's going to be aggregated, they're going to use it to correlate what you're doing. So we know and consumers are becoming more aware of this. So really the purpose of Anonyome Labs is to provide tools for users, everyday users, that gives them some privacy protection. And so how do we do that? We do it by allowing users to create what we call pseudos or digital identities. And each of those digital identities has a whole lot of capabilities. So, what do you need to be private? Well, maybe you need an alternate phone number. Maybe you need an alternate email address. Maybe you need virtual credit cards rather than a plastic one. Maybe you need a specific VPN configuration. Maybe you need your own browser. And so a user can create one to many of these digital identities, and that's how we offer that protection. And then, so how do we go to market? Well, we go directly to users with an app called MySudo, and most people know us because of our MySudo app. But we also have an enterprise offering where we're providing those same capabilities for enterprises to put it into their applications for their users. So they're the two ways that we sort of get these digital identities or pseudos out to the market. So that's my introduction. Did you want me to go and give a question now, or do you want to keep going around?
Why don't you get started with a question? Yeah.
Okay, so I've got my first question, and it's actually in two parts, and I think it's important when you talk about consumer privacy. So we know there's many great free services out there, particularly from Google and Facebook. Do we believe people are coming to understand that if they use products like these, that they are in fact a product? And if people are understanding that, are they willing to instead pay money for services, including consumer privacy products? So it's that idea of free versus paid and whether you're the product.
Great question. If I can jump in just quickly, I think that it really nails the heart of the kind of consumer priv tech challenge, because you're driven by a desire to give people back control over their data. So, I'm a technologist. When we used to build apps or database-driven applications, we used to take the approach of let's capture all the data, hold it more or less securely, and work out what to do with it. And that's how huge fortunes were amassed by monetizing data. When you're a consumer priv tech firm, you can't do that, and also you believe very strongly that you don't want to do that. But equally, when we were fundraising, we were told, well, the one thing that consumers won't stand for, won't wash for consumers, is to pay for these services. That they, as you say so well, that they are paying currently for with the data. If you're not getting it free, you are the product, and that's a whole pillar of like Web 2.0. If you think about like Tim Berners-Lee, the first web was like connecting machines, and then it was monetizing us as kind of avatars, and it's been very difficult to break out of that. And I think there's no way around it. Just like organizations have had to become much more mindful of their data with GDPR and other regulations and go through some pain and a lot of remedial work, I think we're kind of conning people, at least in the short term, that they can't sacrifice any convenience for that privacy. And it'd be interesting to know whether you guys think that's any easier a sell than it was a couple of years ago, because that was the the death knell for a lot of like nascent consumer priv tech businesses.
Right. Well, why don't I pick that up, because that actually goes to something we've been working on. So I'll do my intro and then kind of answer at least what I perceive the answer to that question to be. I'll share a couple of slides here, which again will only be seen live, not on the recording. But I'm the co-founder of Confidently, and we launched last year. Our whole service, the mission we have is to help consumers take back control of their data. Quick kind of overview of the platform. I think one of the big challenges, and this goes to what Paul and Gilbert were talking about, is to make it tangible and understandable for consumers, right? To remove some of the wonkiness and the tech and the very nitty-gritty details of the legal and regulatory environment, to say what's in it for you, right? And I think you can get consumers to a point where they say, okay, well, I might pay for that, right? I might, and you know, a big part of what we did with our beta last year was say, hey, look, can we find customers? How easy is it to find customers who will pay? We have a $10 a month subscription offering, and the product does three things. One is helps you see, confidently see. Show me my exposure. Who has my data? How many companies have my data? What kind of data do they have? There's a lot more we can do kind of going down that path to sort of give people the visibility, because right now it's sort of a black box. You say privacy, you say people have my data, you say I want to take control back, but how big a problem is it? Well, they need some help visualizing that, and that's a big part of what we're building. Two is the actual action component. When it comes back to taking back control, this means you should decide as a consumer who has my data and who doesn't. And to Gilbert's point, you decide that, hey, with this business, with Netflix, I'm willing to sort of exchange this kind of data for this kind of service, or Google or Facebook or whatever. But for other businesses, the value's not there. I don't want them to have my data, right? Or I'm not willing to give it away for free. And so on the back end, we're basically helping folks make the delete and do not sell requests and make that as seamless as we can for the consumer, so they don't have to do that in thousands of places on their own. We're building the back end to help them do it and act as their authorized agent across the footprint. And so that's a big pain point that we found for consumers is, once I've decided I want to do something, how do I make it easy? Because the system is not designed to be easy. And the third part, in terms of why would you pay for a subscription, is what's the ongoing value? What's the monitoring piece? And so with data breach alerts and sort of other verifications that we're doing to make sure that when people say they've removed your data, verifying that the data stays removed, we're sort of, again, providing that monitoring component, as well as expanding coverage to 1,000 companies over time, right? So we're starting with kind of 200 of sort of, you know, some of the most recognizable brands, and also some of the biggest data brokers, and giving folks coverage to delete and take back control of their data in those places. But to sort of get to the full extent of someone's footprint, that's hundreds, if not thousands, of companies across millions of people, and getting to the end of your digital footprint will take a lot of time. So part of the value of the subscription is we'll continue to give you, value and expand the coverage more and more over the coming months and years. So that's basically what we're up to. So I think my answer to to Paul's question is, I think if you can translate the problem and communicate the benefit in the way that's tangible, this is about reducing the number of data breaches you have. This is about reducing the likelihood that you're going to have identity theft. This might be about helping you recoup compensation for a data breach that you were in. This might be about getting fewer spam emails and spam calls because your data is in fewer hands. If you can make it about consumer benefit and translate in a way that shows benefit, then I think you have an opportunity to get to a point where consumers are willing to pay for it. Last thing I'll offer, and then this is in lieu of my kind of question, but we're asking questions about this all the time. We're trying to do research all the time to understand what consumers want. We've done a series of surveys every 6 or 12 months or so about privacy. We did one before COVID, we did one during COVID, and we've done one recently the last 2 weeks. One of my big questions, and we get this all the time from investors, is how big of a problem is this, and will consumers pay, right? And what are people telling us? So again, I'll just highlight a few of these things and we come back. I've heard some sessions earlier today where folks were saying, hey, well, consumers don't really care, or consumers don't really care about privacy, or it's coming down in terms of importance as an issue. That's not what we've seen in our research. We've actually seen that before COVID, during COVID, and after COVID, people are answering that question the same. We asked people to just say, on a 10-point scale, how important is this to you? 8.5, 8.3, 8.7. They're sort of always dancing around sort of in the high 8s to 9s in terms of their interest. So we're seeing that people are very interested in this. Over the past 2 years, in matter of fact, consumers have said they're more concerned about their privacy than they were 2 years ago, and they want to take back control of their data. So when we asked people the question in 2019, are you concerned? Do you want to take control back? 33% said yes. When we asked that same question this year, 46% of people said yes. So we're seeing, again, an increase in appetite and willingness to want to do something about the problem. Third, we asked this of Californians. This is kind of our core market. That's where the CCPA, right, is in effect, and we have the strongest value proposition. We asked folks, have you taken advantage of any of your privacy rights? And 60% of people haven't done anything, right, with respect to privacy. Not surprising. There isn't broad awareness of the CCPA. There's not broad awareness of the new regulatory regime. And that's why most people didn't take action. But there's also a key segment of those people that knew they could, but just thought it was too hard, or they didn't know where to start. So there are some gaps here. There's a gap between people's interest in privacy and the fact they want to do something about it and their actual ability to execute on that. Last data point I'll leave you with is we asked the folks who have done something, hey, how many times have you done it? How many companies have you acted with? And on average, we heard about 5, they've acted with about 5 companies. Again, that's a good start. But again, from our research, part of the challenge with any of these regulatory regimes, right, is that it's all, the onus is on the consumer to do it. It's not designed to be easy to do the delete, to do the do not sell, to do the access request. And so after about 5 or 10 companies, you're like, okay, that's it, I'm done. The problem is that consumers have their data in hundreds, if not thousands of different places. And so if you're really gonna take control of your data, you've gotta act in more than 5 or 10 places. So there's a gap in terms of awareness, and there's a gap of the ability to sort of execute what you wanna do. But we have not seen a gap in terms of, you know, consumers' interest and appetite. We just need to figure ways to bridge the gap. So I'll stop sharing, and that's, I think, kind of where I'll leave it in terms of some of the things we're seeing on our end.
Yeah, I think that really hits the nail on the head. I also was slightly shocked by that poll I heard about earlier in the day, which was talking about, you know, that consumers have become less fussed about privacy in the 2 odd years since GDPR. I mean, just in terms of a little bit of background, I'm a privacy technologist and an entrepreneur in this space, and I kind of got into privacy by mistake about 6 years ago because I was running a London digital agency, and we were building a lot of you know, websites and applications, which you know, we were kind of in the role of the Cinderella of the ad tech space. So it was doing it for destinations like MSN, where they were using a lot of cookies and a lot of tracking to obviously you know, see the return that their advertisers were getting. And we became aware of, you know, what was happening around, you know, for us, cookies were simply tools, but they were being used. And it was the first time it started to creep into the public consciousness that they were being used to create profiles as part of this kind of multi-billion-dollar advertising, behavioral advertising market. And that enabled us to pivot into a product business around cookie compliance and apply some of our experience of UX to, you know, tools for companies to audit and categorize, and an interface for people to exercise control. And we thought we were really, you know, we'd really moved the needle on that. And we built that up, and we sold that to companies well known now called OneTrust. What I found is that we kind of sort of got stuck in many ways in that kind of rut, in that the only consumer grade technology that has existed for people has been the cookie banner, and I'm as sick of them as anyone else, you know. And I click to make them go away, and I think to a certain extent they're being used almost. There's almost you know, dark patterns being used in that. If now I think, you know, you can click on the banner and just say accept all, just one more click, you can actually have quite a lot of control. But who goes that, you know, with the click attrition, we've all become, you know, so used to that. So, I mean, wanting to move on from that, I spent the last 2 years as CEO of a company called Tapmydata, which had the explicit goal of putting this more consumer grade tools in the hands of people, and also to start to build up a record of you know, at the moment, as Brent was saying, relatively few people exercise their rights, and people who do have already got a kind of reputation as being, you know, they're weaponizing it. So they're disgruntled ex-employees, or ambulance chasing lawyers, or privacy activists with big angry beards. And sure, some of them are, but actually there's a huge amount of the population who I would argue don't care less about privacy. It's just moved on. It's moved on from privacy to control and trust. And actually, I mean, since we launched a service and, a couple of years ago, we gathered a lot of information. We found that, the average person has about 120 organizations that have a record on them. And we also found out that among those, non-weaponized SARs, if companies got back in a proactive way and a friendly way that didn't require huge amounts of new information, of personal ID information, that you could not tick off a lot of those requests, because actually people wanted to get into dialogue with their data. So what I'm just going to share one picture, because what I've been doing, my New Year's resolution has been to talk to people in real life about privacy. Because I spent the last 2 years talking to privacy lawyers, to DPOs, to technologists. Now, full disclosure, this is my father-in-law, and I wanted to talk to him because he mentioned that he'd made the move to Signal along with all of his friends at the start of the year. And, he wouldn't mind me saying that he's a baby boomer, and all of his friends previously they'd meet and go to the pub, but since COVID, they've been doing this with WhatsApp. He explained to me that in the course of 24, 48 hours, there was all of his friends started reaching out to him saying, I am leaving WhatsApp because of my concerns around what they're doing with my data, and moving to Signal. And so those conversations have moved like that. And actually now he's started to sort of evangelize it. So when I started to dig into it more, I saw that contrary to what we all assume in the kind of privacy village, the average consumer actually knows what's going on. So he was saying that, that he knew that his data was out there, and he knew that he'd accepted terms and conditions to release it out there, but now he didn't really think that that was fair because the rules were being changed. And also, he's saying, I know my data's out there, but I don't know what you're doing with it. But do I trust you? So I think what we're seeing, and what's exciting for the opportunity for consumer privacy tech is that it's focusing, I think to a certain extent it's mission accomplished, both in terms of, legal advice, training programs, and, and tech platforms, in terms of enabling companies to get on top of their requirements, their compliance obligations. But there's this need for, a new suite of products. And just, I'll just quickly show. So this is, and what we're starting to see now is that the functions that you get, this is from a Forbes piece which came out a couple of days ago, which shows that different amounts of data which are captured by different services. So you see on the left-hand side, Signal is pretty clean, and WhatsApp's somewhere in the middle. And you see, obviously, maybe unsurprisingly, given its business model, Facebook is capturing a lot more data. So we're starting to see, in that kind of, in 1 week in January, 17 million people, there are 17 million downloads of Signal. And also I should mention Telegram. So one other thing is that, I think there's a crossover starting as we're seeing big growth in things like the crypto scene, which is more embraced by younger people. I think some of the preconceptions that we have about, young people do this, boomers do that, most people don't care, is starting to get broken down, and I think that's really going to give us some clues to developing the new killer apps in consumer priv tech.
So Gilbert, really, WhatsApp has done the privacy industry a big favour, haven't they? Because all they've done is raise the awareness around the world. They've just let everyone know that, we said something, we've decided to change our mind, we're going to take your data and put it somewhere else, and people are going, hold on, I didn't know companies could do this. So what do you think? Is it a great boom for the privacy industry?
Well, what I do see is that there's a much needed focus. I think in the early days there was a desire. I mean, I think we projected too much of our own concerns onto the average consumer, and also we make time for this stuff because we're paid to, or because we believe it, or hopefully both. And I think, what we did at Tapmydata was focus on one very specific question. Actually, I think that's just scratching the surface. And I think if you can also have a story, it enables you to transition from one business model, because we've all come out of a data harvesting model one way or another, and we've all kind of been complicit. So, the founders of Signal were, one of the founders of Signal was one of the founders of WhatsApp. And, people are able to say, this is what we did then. We're calling time on this now, because we're seeing that the engine of this growth is redlining, and it's in danger of melting down. And I think regulation moves at one speed, and I think what we'll see in PrevTech is it start to decouple from that, because actually you can be compliant but still not doing, in the consumer's eyes, the right thing. And that's deadly.
I noticed, by the way, Brad Garson had a question in the chat. So maybe why don't we turn to that, and then I'll encourage folks to ask questions in the chat, because we're just, again, welcome the conversation. Brad's question, is it generational, consumer privacy? Is it, the who cares about privacy? So is it a young versus old thing? I'll start with an answer because, we've done a lot of research, and similarly to Gilbert, we tried to get out of sort of the bubble of just talking to experts and folks in the field, and went to, I'm sitting in Berkeley, California. We go to some coffee houses around campus and just talk to people about privacy and sort of privacy. And we definitely observed there is an age gap in terms of people's interest and awareness. What we found is, and again, take this for what it's worth, small sample sizes, and we're on campus at Berkeley, but a lot of younger folks are already aware and are already taking some proactive steps to protect themselves. So they may not just be signing up for every service without understanding the trade-offs. They may not just be registering for every free Wi-Fi at every cafe. And so I found that they're already a little more cognizant and thinking about it even before they register for something, in a way that many of the rest of us who've been around the block for a while haven't. I've also noticed that a lot of our customers, the folks that are paying for our service, tend to be middle-aged plus, and some of our hypothesis on that is they also have more to lose, more assets, more data that they have put out there. These are folks who've been around since Web 1.0 and are starting to realize, oh my God, I to Gilbert's point, not just 120 pots, but maybe 250 or 300 pots. My data is everywhere. And now I'm thinking maybe that wasn't so wise, or maybe I want to figure out how to claw some of that back. And so I think there's a combination between, I've been on the internet for a long time. I have more assets and reputation and things at risk. And I have more income, and I'm willing to pay for a privacy service. And I haven't been vigilant about it from my first day on the internet. So that's what I've seen, but curious what you all think about.
I'll give some sort of data on that from the sort of the MySudo point of view. So I would say our initial users are also kind of the technically aware people, the people that have sort of had a bit of a technical background. They actually understand what was going on, and they came on early. But over the last couple of years, just organically, that's grown out of the technical space, and probably the people with assets to other people who have become more aware of it. So I think that the population that is understanding the need for consumer privacy tools and actually using them, I think is growing from technical people to kind of almost the normals is starting to get involved.
Yeah, I think on the sort of different demographics, it's interesting. I mean, we sort of talked about boomers being kind of disgusted with the WhatsApp move, and I think what we're also seeing with people maybe in the sort of midpoint of their career is that there's been all sorts of people bounced into an online space. We're all doing this. We're all blending, homework with home and work lives. That the kind of streams have been disrupted. So it's like it's very much advanced the trends that already began with bring your own device and things like that. I think particularly with young people who were dismissed in the early days, as not caring about their privacy. I think who are the true digital natives. I mean, I'm 46, so I've still got one foot in the analog space. But I think actually they get the data value exchange much more intuitively than either of the previous two groups. And the reason they're not getting, they're not visible is that they feel disenfranchised. They're not dealt into this game, and they're disinterested with platforms beyond what they deliver. But again, that doesn't make them very sticky customers. And it also, gives an opportunity around, for PrivTech, consumer PrivTech, to offer a new deal. And we've seen, the most of the tech infrastructure is there. Digital natives are familiar with things like tokenized value in-game mechanics. So you can even start to get the kind of thing that has been looked into and never really fulfilled its promise yet, with people start to take control and actually make choices about the monetization of their data, whether to share that or to gain from it.
Yeah, I can see a question there for me. It said, Paul, how long did it take before non-technical folks started joining MySudo? So the reason I think that technical folks started is because of podcasts or technical forums that they were members of. When it started to branch out of that is when we started to get this organic growth of people just telling their friends, why don't you get on this? We can do, secure email. You can also get a virtual credit card. You got a browser and everything. So it changed when we started to get this organic growth of people actually telling their friends and neighbors about the app. Whereas initially it was really, do I attend this privacy podcast? I'm on Reddit and the privacy group, and that's why it was in that. So I would say, maybe it took a year. We're about, I think, 2.5 years into MySudo, and maybe after a year, you start to get that organic growth of people outside of the technical community.
I see another question from Brad here, just going through the chat. Is this the responsibility of the consumer or the businesses? CCPA says businesses. Your thoughts? I'll give a quick answer and then kick it over. We certainly are spending a lot of time in the details of the CCPA. I actually see the CCPA as sort of a balance, and again, plenty of problems, not perfect, and a lot of improvement to be made. There are certainly expectations that the CCPA makes for businesses in terms of standards of how you deal with the SARs, in terms of how you handle PII, and whether you're negligent in terms of exposing your customers' data to a breach. So there's certain sort of standards, but I wouldn't say that it puts the responsibility. So the business certainly has responsibility, but there are certainly a lot of things in the CCPA in terms of the consumer's rights into the CCPA that are completely in the consumer's hands. And that's where we feel like there's this huge gap. The balance that the regulators and the legislators kind of, the negotiation they had with industry is, this is still fundamentally an opt-out model. It's not an opt-in model. And so it is still, the onus is still on the consumers to sort of take action in all of the places that they want to take action. And businesses don't have to make that easy. And there's not a lot of incentive to make that easy. So I think the CCPA has certain expectations and a certain level, service level, that businesses need to maintain in terms of how they manage data, how they secure that data, and how they don't make it exposed in breaches. But then in terms of other rights that are given to consumers, the onus is really on the consumer to exercise those rights. And that's not always easy to do. So I think there's going to be constant tension here between how consumer friendly is the regulation, how easy is it for the consumer to do the things they want, and how much pushback do they get from businesses that are trying to protect these huge investments in data and that they've gathered over time, and not sort of, just sort of give that asset away.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think there's a balance between what's the responsibility of the business and what's the responsibility of the user. I mean, a great example is, password managers have had a sort of a big growth in the last few years, and it's because at the end of the day, it's up to the person themselves to create a password that's hard and maybe unique to just that account. And there's nothing the business can do to help it, right? It has to be done at the consumer level. And it's the same as, you could say, we issue virtual credit cards so people don't have to use their plastic credit card numbers online. And why does that help? Well, some of those businesses just get hacked and they get the information stolen, so they could be doing everything to follow regulation, but at the end of the day, a hacker comes in and steals that information. So at the end of the day, there is this balance between the consumer can help themselves as well as the business can help the consumer.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I think there are two really encouraging trends. I mean, coming from the UK, I actually I really appreciate the greater granularity that CCPA is given on consumer rights, and also the acknowledgement that that data is being sold and that you can opt out of this. Because it starts to again sort of socialize, starts to give the bigger picture of what's happening to the consumer. Because really, we started this process with complete ignorance in that we are sold these things explicitly as this is a boon, this is a benefit. If there's free Wi-Fi, actually, what was happening, you kind of get cracked on your head and all your data being taken. Now these are starting to get more codified, and I think the CCPA is an important step to that. I think also, as Paul was saying, the move towards tokenized credentials as the passport to exercise your rights and to exercise services, so that you don't have a situation where you've got many different points. Because as we both know, still, like security, privacy, you're only as strong as the weakest link in the chain. So, what was exposed when we were, poking the ant hill of data rights was that if I want to exercise my data rights, the first thing I'd be asked would be to scan, copies of my government-issued ID and send them to a generic email address at the organization for them to begin that. To consider whether they would accept that. And I completely understand where they're coming from, I have to say that. But that was, again, the difference between, as someone was saying in the questions, that's the difference between someone saying that they're okay, they don't care about these things, and actually not exercising their rights. But acquiescence does not mean agreement. And I think if consumer PrivTech is going to, jump out of that kind of, we've got to do this because GDPR and we have systems to help that, then it transforms what otherwise could become almost a kind of sort of quite a stodgy corollary of GRC and security systems. And actually what we've seen is that a lot of those systems can handle this really well, and that's a huge existing market. So I think part of the discussions that have been going on earlier today have been about where exactly does PrivTech sit and where does consumer PrivTech, and I think it will be having things like having a digital identity that I control and I can choose to share in an ongoing dialogue of trust with organizations and with groups, is closer to the tools that we all use, like for messaging, and is also closer to how we navigate these relationships in real life. We have a plumber come in today, and there was a document lying on the table. He didn't go and take a snapshot of that, and because we wouldn't allow that in real life. So again, I'm spending more and more time trying to get back towards what we do IRL in real life, rather than thinking that a technological problem alone will solve this, or a regulatory, or we've all been waiting for the regulatory cavalry to come over the horizon many times, and they're always slower than that's how it works. I think for this to be 2021 to be the year that consumer PrivTech breaks, we have to make our own fortune and ride these currents that we're seeing, like Signal, and in other areas. I mean, we've seen people. I'm jumping ahead, but I think people power is a good thing for consumer PrivTech to plug into as a kind of theme.
So a couple of comments and then another question. I'm just going into the chat, and Brandy had offered this question about consumers versus businesses, that businesses do have constraints on how they can offer DSARs under the CCPA. They're in the regs. That's right. So that's very accurate, which is, businesses, it's not all in the business. They have to act within the framework that has been set. And so that's a good, thank you for making that point. Melanie also suggested that consumers may have the responsibility but businesses need to build it and make sure it actually works, which is right. So it's like the consumer can ask for whatever they want, but unless the business can actually fulfill the request, it's not going to happen. So ultimately that responsibility does lie with the business. And then I thought Michelle Dennehy's point about the valuing UX, and I'd say in particular, I think with consumer tech like this, I mean, you might put up with a certain level of okay UX with a business application because you have to, you know, as a bit to operate within a business. But I think in terms of consumers taking up this kind of technology, making it intuitive, making it fun to use, making it the kind of thing that you want to share with other people is so critical to getting any kind of adoption to this kind of technology. So UX is extremely undervalued, and I think even more important in consumer privacy tech than it may be in business privacy tech. One other question, and I'll throw this to you guys from Privacy Pro. Is there any data on the adoption curve of consumer privacy tech, meaning privacy sensitive tech that is used by a consumer? Who is collecting and tracking this data on adoption? Have you guys seen anything on that?
That's a great question, because I think one of the things that was missing is some kind of benchmarking. I mean, we are starting to see, you know, a privacy stack develop, you know, around Brave, and also I think, as I mentioned before, that's starting to bleed into the kind of crypto sphere as well, and there's a definite convergence between those. I can't think of, maybe you guys know, but I can't think of any one place I could go see that. Interestingly, the clues I get more and more are that a publication like Forbes is doing more and more profiles on PrivTech. Whereas before it would be, you know, within the kind of privacy village or from a RegTech perspective, this is becoming, or, you know, my father-in-law saying, I asked, where did you hear about it? He said, I read about this in the Sunday Times. I think it would be very interesting to start to create some kind of thermometer or index about, because there needs to be more than one or two unicorns, and some of these names that are being bandied around at the very early stages that Lourdes is, you know, helping nurture are going to be those. So great question. I think that's a real opportunity for someone.
Frankly, the only correlation I've seen is that in terms of investment dollars, in the sense that, you know, we know there's been a bunch more investment on the kind of enterprise side of the privacy tech. Now I'm speaking privacy tech space, privacy tech, than there has been on the consumer side. And there's probably some correlation there in terms of, you know, use of the tech and investment dollars. It's not absolute, of course, but I think you can also follow the money to some extent. And the consumer side, I think, is on the bottom end of the teeter-totter and needs to come back in balance. And so I think you'll see over the next 12 to 24 months a lot more consumer interest, but also investor interest as the market comes in a little more equilibrium between what's happening on the enterprise side and what kind of tools are available to consumers. So that will be another metric to look at.
Yeah, and I think I don't think there's like a single place where you can go and find this out, because the tooling is so broad. Like if you think about browser, you know, people think, oh, DuckDuckGo, but that'll be compared against other browsers,
right?
And password managers and virtual card solutions and all the different solutions out there. They're kind of really compared to others in the same market. They're not really compared against across the privacy space, I think.
We've got about 5 minutes. Should we maybe offer some closing words, unless there are any other questions that we wanted to touch on before we close?
I do see there's a comment in there on anonymity solutions only as strong as the pool you can be lost in. It's kind of an interesting point, because the question is, do we really want anonymity, or is that what we want online, or do we want to be known but want to be protected? It's an interesting question, and I'll give you an example. So when I go shopping online, you know, I create a shopping pseudo and I have an alternate phone number, so I'm not giving out my mobile number. I've got an alternate email address for that. I use virtual credit cards for that. I may even get my goods shipped to sort of an Amazon store or something, right? But at the end of the day, I still kind of want to be known as Paul Ashley, because, you know, if something happens to the product and I need to ring them and get refunds, I sort of still want to be Paul Ashley. I just don't want all that other data sitting around. And I think Gilbert had the great example. You don't sort of like leave your credit card on the table and your mobile number and all that for people just to read and take copies of. But as soon as you go online, say shopping, you're effectively leaving it on their kitchen table for anyone to have a look at and steal. So I don't know if it's anonymity exactly that you need. In some cases you do. In other cases, it's like, no, I want to be Paul. I just want to be able to buy without giving away all my identifiers, or I just want to be able to message with my friends without anyone else reading it. But we're still ourselves. So it's an interesting question about anonymity.
Well, in terms of sort of final thoughts, and happy to answer any questions which come up. I think one of the things that strikes me is, our conversations. We talked about different groups, and we've talked about different technological tools which are starting to raise their head above a parapet. I think the fundamental question remains, if I get my data back, what do I then do with it? And I think that's a way to start to bring these groups together, because on my own I don't have much voice, and I can't get the best deal for my data, even if I am minded to monetize it. And most people have got better things to do with their time. Obviously together we're stronger, and one of the big challenges, which has been greatly exacerbated by COVID, is that local stores have gone bust, whereas Amazon has conquered all. So I'm really excited by the trend of data unions in the EU. They're talking about data trusts in the UK, and movements, to a lesser extent movements like the Yang Gang in the US, because when we're thinking about to whom we trust our data, there are lots of organizations in our lives that we do trust, whether it's our church or a sports club or a neighborhood association. I think that would be a really interesting theme to start to stitch some of these different technological solutions and different players together, because this is a really tough time for charities. There is a market for data, and that data market's been disrupted. You could say it's even in a death spiral. This could provide, in terms of what I'm looking at this year, I think the idea of collective action in a productive way is probably the most exciting theme.
I think that's an excellent point. I think that will come into play with respect to compliance of individual companies with their responsibilities. I think it will also come into play when it comes to, and I'm just, again, thinking of the US example, as to whether or not we will build a national sort of privacy framework, have a privacy bill. Right now, California sort of has set the example, and that's kind of one of the only standards. And whether it will go the way of like automobile emission standards, where it's sort of like California sets the standard and the country complies because it's the biggest state. But anyway, that's another area where just activism in terms of, are we going to have a national standard in the US or not? Are we going to have a privacy law in the US or not? Is this the time to do it? So I think there's activism around compliance and companies doing the same thing, the right thing. There's activism around monetizing my data and that kind of thing. But there's also just activism on the regulatory environment and whether people care enough to get involved to set a standard and help kind of force policymakers to do something at the national level. Great. Any last questions? Well, I think we're kind of out of time.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well,
Gilbert, Paul, enjoy the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for your time and great questions, guys.
Great. We'll see you guys on the main stage or in the discussion. Bye, guys.
Cheers.